now absolute pleasure to introduce our last speaker, Dr. Jeff Day, who's an assistant professor at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, Department of Art as Applied to Medicine, where he teaches courses in animation and design. Dr. Day earned a MA in medical and biological illustration at Johns Hopkins University and a BA and MD at Case Western Reserve University. So I've actually known Jeff since we were medical illustration classmates at Hopkins. I'm a little familiar with his absolutely incredible work. So I can't wait to see what he has for us today. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Dr. Day to give his talk entitled Getting the Picture, More Accessible Scripts for Science Animations. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Chris. Oh, shoot, I gotta share the sound. Let's see. Okay, thanks very much. I think thanks very much for that kind introduction. I think it stole a little bit of the thunder of the beginning of my presentation, but I'm going to talk about writing scripts to be a little bit more accessible for learners of all types. And this pertains to animations, it pertains to videos. And if any of you think that, well, I don't make animations, if any of you give PowerPoint presentations, this could apply to you as well. So as Chris said, I'm from the Department of Art as Applied to Medicine at Johns Hopkins. We have a medical illustration training program where we train graduate students to become medical illustrators. We also have faculty that produce illustrations and all sorts of visualizations to communicate science and medicine, from illustrations to animations, videos, sculptures, 3D prints, you name it. We do it all. And so I teach animation and I make animations. This is just a quick clip of one of my animations as an example.
Gluten and celiac disease, from NIH Medline Plus magazine. Gluten, it's all over the news. But what is it and where can it be found? Gluten is a protein. It is found naturally in some grains, such as wheat, barley, and rye. Nope, not you, rice. Common food products.
So that's an example of one of my videos, but what if you couldn't see the images, or if you couldn't see the images well? You know, we can think about, do you get all the information that you need from the narration? I'm going to play it again one more time. You can think about like what information you're getting without seeing the images.
Gluten and celiac disease, from NIH Medline Plus magazine. Gluten, it's all over the news. But what is it and where can it be found? Gluten is a protein. It is found naturally in some grains, such as wheat, barley, and rye. Nope, not you, rice. Common food products.
So I made this when I was working at the NIH, and I talked to a lot of accessibility experts because everything that we make needs to pass certain accessibility standards for the public. And, you know, we have discussions like, do we need to describe that little rice guy? Do you need to mention it walking in? Are people getting an equivalent experience? What do we need to know about that? And so we always had different types of opinions. This past year, I did a little bit more delving into audio description, or what we might need to describe to give an accessible experience. So I like videos in general because they can be accessible for those with low vision. If you can't see very well, you can hear what's going on, especially if it's scripted well. If you can't hear very well, you can see what's going on, and perhaps there could be closed captioning on the bottom that you can read. It's good for different reading aptitudes, and it's also good for distracted learners. So if you're like me, you might have a video on when you're cooking, when you're working, and you might be learning a little bit from there. When I was in med school, I used to drive around and had a laptop playing board review videos. And so I couldn't be looking at my laptop the whole time. I would listen to it. So the more descriptive it was, the more helpful it was for me as a distracted learner. And this gets into the idea of universal design for learning. So ways that we can represent things in as many ways as possible to help as many learners as possible. If you're interested to learn more, you could go to cast.org. But the basic tenets are, how do we provide different ways to engage learners, to motivate them? how do we provide different ways to represent information to learners? And that's what we do as medical illustrators. We try to represent things in different ways. And how do we provide learners opportunities to show what they know, to demonstrate their learning? And so we're going to talk mostly about representation in this topic. And so one example of universal design in media is closed captioning. This was initially designed for those who couldn't hear very well, so you could read what's going on the screen. But even if you hear perfectly fine, I'm sure we've all used closed captioning before because it's really helpful, right? So maybe we're in a quiet room. It helps to be able to read what's going on. Maybe someone on screen has a strong accent. It's hard to understand, so it helps to read. Or maybe we're learning a new topic and it has some vocabulary words and we just want to see how it's spelled out. So closed captioning can help out in many different ways, and it helps many different learners. So it's getting to that ideal of universal design. So audio description is kind of the opposite of closed captioning. It's for those who can't see what's going on the screen. And I'm taking the definition from the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and I'll just read it to you. So audio description is something that augments the audio portion of the presentation with the information needed when the video portion is not available. It's played during existing pauses in the dialogue, and it provides information about actions, characters, scene changes, and on-screen text that are important and are not described or spoken in the main soundtrack. So basically, the goal is we want to describe everything that's important on the screen so that someone who doesn't see what's going on can have a good idea of what's happening in the screen. And Section 508 is a rule from the government where every piece of media that is produced, every video, needs to also have an audio described version. So there's 2 versions of every media, ideally, so that those who couldn't see very well can also access the information. I'm going to provide an example from The Lion King. And so this is from the movie, this scene, and you can just watch it and see what you think. All right, so, and now we have a version that is audio described, so you can see what that's like. And you can imagine what it's like. If you didn't see very well, you can close your eyes, you can watch the whole thing.
Rafiki breaks one open. The wise old baboon dips his thumb in its juice and draws a line on Simba's forehead. Then he takes a handful of sand and sprinkles it over him.
So there's 2 versions of this movie. There's an audio described version. Now Netflix is doing a pretty good job with their accessibility as well. They have audio described versions of many of their shows and movies as well. So it's been shown in the literature that audio description is helpful for low vision users. It's more enjoyable, it's more informative, and it's more memorable. Not too surprising there. There's also the idea of coherence. So that's the idea of the balance between how much narrative description you have and the user experience. So you can imagine if we describe too much, it could be overwhelming. It could get in the way of the flow. It could get in the way of our understanding of the topic. So we want to have just the right amount of description. And there's been a lot of studies done on movies and TV regarding audio description, but not so much done on explainer videos, which is what I make, and is also a popular way for many people to learn. And so these are online videos that go pretty fast. They explain a topic, and they can get hundreds of thousands to millions of views. So many people use these as a way to learn. Last year, I had a team that helped to kind of investigate this idea at Johns Hopkins. And we had a digital learning and education grant to try to explore audio description a little more to better understand for ourselves what might be best. And we had members from the School of Medicine, School of Education, and Peabody Institute, which is our music school. So our goals were to make videos that promote accessibility as well as universal design for learning. And we also wanted to test audio description preferences in both normal and low vision users. So I've dealt a lot with accessibility through my years working at the NIH, but I never got to actually talk to someone who had low vision to see what they think. Our questions included what audio description is needed for an explainer video. And we also want to see if we could create a workflow where one video meets the needs for audiences for both normal and low vision, trying to achieve that universal design, which is good in general, just to have a video that helps as many people as possible. But also it can be helpful for us as creators because we don't have to go through the effort of making two different videos. Hopefully we can just make one that fits both. So we tested two videos. One was an education video, and that was on universal design for learning. And another was a health video. So I'm a medical illustrator. And so we created a health video to test. We created a survey in Qualtrics, and so we had these Likert scale questions that could be scored. We also had free response answers. We recruited normal vision users through Amazon MTurk. We got about 200 respondents, and we also recruited low vision users through the National Federation of the Blind, and we got about 100 respondents. So just a couple of examples of our test scenarios. We had longer clips for them to watch, but you can just see the difference between our less described and our more described version of the video. Oh, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, oh, there we go. I just wanted to mention that we tried to write scripts that we felt met the audio description requirements that told the viewers everything they wanted to know. But we also hired on an audio description company to help us think of anything else that we might want to describe. And so we compared a lower described version versus a higher described version. And my personal goal was to be able to get away with as little description as possible so that we still have these fast, punchy videos. So this is I'm gonna show for our education video, the less described version first.
To maximize the potential for learning, students need variety within their courses.
And this is our more described version.
To maximize the potential for learning, students, like this orange slanty-headed boy and turquoise girl with large round glasses, need variety within their courses.
And I'll make mention that the audio description company actually felt that we had pretty good scripts, which made me feel good because it was evidence that, you know, we could make a video that met the audio description requirements, and we could just make one video. And also it was interesting working with them because they had never come across a video where they had to add audio description to that didn't have any pauses. So it was quite a challenge for them as well to think of what and how to describe these videos. So my hypothesis for the education video, including the clip that you just saw, was that the more described videos do not necessarily achieve coherence. I thought maybe it was a little too much information to have that boy and girl described. I thought they were kind of decorative features. And the description could be distracting from the main message. So I predicted that participants would prefer the less described video. Here's an example from our health video. So first, the less described video.
Hi, I'm your pelvic floor muscles. I am shaped like a bowl, and I sit at the bottom of your pelvis. There are many parts to me. I hug the tubes that lead to the bladder, uterus, and bowels. One part of me helps you hold in your pee, and another part bottles up farts when you're in public.
Now show the more described version of it.
I'm a cartoon version of your pelvic floor muscles. I am shaped like a bowl, and I sit at the bottom of your pelvis. There are many parts to me. I hug the tubes that lead to the urinary bladder in the front, pear-shaped uterus in the middle, and bowels in the back of the pelvis. One part of me helps you hold in your pee, and another part bottles up farts when you're in public. Oops, I let one go.
So my hypothesis for the health video was that I liked the more described version, actually. I thought it helped a lot. But I thought that maybe participants wouldn't necessarily notice the difference between the two videos. So looking at the results, if we look at all the results of the Likert scale questions, there is no statistical difference between the less described and the more described videos for both our education video and our health video. And so that gave me a little bit more credence to, hey, I think we could create one video that is kind of like getting towards universal design that could be helpful for all. By the way, I only have very preliminary results. We just got our results back a couple weeks ago. And so this is just a sneak peek of what we've discovered so far. But the write-in responses I thought were really, really insightful. So looking at the education video write-in responses, comparing the more and the less described video, this is one person's response. I prefer the more described video because it describes things that I did not realize were present in the previous video. It describes the two people in the beginning and also the shapes towards the end that demonstrate the various aspects of UDL. And so right now I'm giving you the responses from our low vision users. And this was very insightful for me because I'm definitely biased against describing the shape and the color of the characters in the beginning because I thought they were decorative. But many people actually wrote in that they preferred having these descriptions. So that was definitely eye-opening for me. I thought this, a few people wrote that for someone who is blind, these are the same. So even for blind folks, some people found that the two descriptions were the same. And I'm having trouble with my advancing. And then some people said stuff like, the graphic descriptions in the more described video were not needed and created verbal clutter as it related to the purpose of the video. So that's what I was thinking in the beginning. I thought it was a little too much. I didn't think it achieved coherence. It was interesting that some folks in the blind group also thought so. So we had views from all across the board. From my quick look, it seemed like more people did actually prefer the described version, which I thought was interesting. But we had folks who thought all across the board on that one. Regarding the health video, one quote was, the more described video explains relative position and shape of different parts, and it makes it much easier to visualize everything. And I think in general, across the board, in our low vision group, people prefer the more described video. This was also an interesting quote to me. At one point, I got lost and I didn't know what part he was talking about as he made a visual reference and simply said, we are talking about this. Not being able to see it made difficult to know what this was. And so this was a nice reminder to be very precise with our language and descriptive with our language. And right now we're teaching an animation class. We're writing scripts right now. And this is one of the things that I tell the student to avoid words like this and rather to use more descriptive language. And I didn't follow my own advice. So that was a nice reminder. So our questions that I presented earlier was, what audio description is needed for an explainer video? Well, it kind of depends. It depends on what your audience, who your audience is and what they might like and what your message is. And then can we create a workflow where one teaching video meets the needs of audiences with normal and low vision? I think yes, but also sometimes I think maybe and maybe sometimes. So I think you're never going to create something that meets the needs for everybody, but you can think of ways to meet the needs of more people. Just like for a fully sighted video, we can all think of videos with scripts that are a little bit better and a little bit worse. And some people might like some and some people might like others. Like I said, this also pertains to giving a PowerPoint presentation because we have images on the slides and we can think of how we describe the slides as we're speaking about the slides. It's the same thing as an animation. This image is just a reminder that we all see things in different ways. We all experience the world in different ways. And it's not black and white, right? It's not just folks who can see everything and folks who can see nothing. So for example, if we look at the panel on the lower left, If we describe that yellow character with the two black eyes as a gluten character that kind of was mischievous and causing havoc, the person who is following the video on the bottom left could actually probably get a little bit more enjoyment out of the video because they know that that's a character doing something. Otherwise, it's just kind of a yellow amorphous blob and it's hard to tell what's going on. So just giving that little description adds that much more experience for the person who sees at this level. So recommendations, again, we can all make our work a little bit more accessible. Want to plan ahead, think of accessibility from the beginning, especially if we're creating something like an animation. Want to use showing writing, not telling writing, that's just good writing in general. Want to describe everything on the screen that's important to our message, including all helpful parts of images and all text and labels. Being descriptive and using specific language is helpful to everybody. So I think a lot of times we want to say something and perhaps show something else on screen. It's nice to be able to describe everything that's important that's going on the screen. And then there's the idea of coherence, which is getting just that right amount of description. So my initial goal was to be able to write some guidelines to better describe audio description and provide better help for people who are writing, but it's really hard. And the guidelines have measurements for many features and accessibility, but audio description is still very subjective. And I don't know that I can provide any more than what's given so far. Finally, the last quote I want to share is, I like that the video was filled with dialogue. This is especially important for me because I'm totally blind and attempting to follow videos without dialogue is stressful. So again, that's a reminder for me and that I try to pass on to our students that providing as much description as possible is helpful. If we have a couple more minutes, it looks like we do. I'll just play like a minute from each video since so that you can see what more of the video was like, and you can think about like if we describe the video well or if there's parts of the video we should have described better.
Getting started with Universal Design for Learning. Design learning for everyone. To maximize the potential for learning, students need variety within their courses. Some students prefer to work alone, while others crave social interactions. Some might benefit more from reading text, while others prefer to listen to an audio recording. Some might prefer to write a paper, while others demonstrate their learning more effectively by creating a presentation. So how do instructors select effective instructional strategies to meet the needs of all students? The Universal Design for Learning, or UDL framework, can help. UDL is a system based on cognitive neuroscience research that provides a blueprint for designing strategies, materials, and assessments that aim to help students overcome barriers to learning. The framework helps to ensure that every student has an equal opportunity to succeed.
So for that last scene, oops, I didn't do a good job pausing on it, but they were passing through like a cactus and dragon and things like that. And I think of those as decorative. It's not really necessary for the learning of the video, and so those were not described. I'm going to move on
floor
to
muscles. Getting to the bottom of constipation. Hi, I'm a cartoon version of your pelvic floor muscles. I am shaped like a bowl, and I sit at the bottom of your pelvis. There are many parts to me. I hug the tubes that lead to the urinary bladder in the front, pear-shaped uterus in the middle, and bowels in the back of the pelvis. One part of me helps you hold in your pee, and another part bottles up farts when you're in public. Oops, I let one go. You can control me. Go ahead, give me a squeeze like you're holding in your pee. Can you feel your underparts tightening up? That's because I also help you poop. Keeping me healthy helps everything move like it should down there. Let's focus on this part. Normally, when you're at rest, the anal sphincter part of me squeezes the anus area to block poop from escaping all the time. The anus is the hole where the poop leaves the butt.
I'll just mention real quick here. So I make sure that everything that is labeled is also mentioned in the narration. Oftentimes as medical illustrators, we like to put a whole ton of labels, and that can be not only overwhelming to look at, but also if we think something is important enough to be labeled, it's a good idea to describe it. So if we want to describe the relation of certain anatomy to another, and we want to put the label, I think it's a good idea to describe it as well. Oops. Oh well. I think I'm about time out of time anyways. If anybody wants to email me about accessibility, it's one of my interests in general. I probably know less about audio description than some of the other tenets, but my email is here if you like. Thanks very much.
Jeff, can you stop your share, please?
Sure.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Jeff. That was incredible, super insightful, and I will definitely take a lot of use my notes that I took on that talk to going forward. And as always, your animations are the best I've ever seen. Top tier, top tier. Okay, great. So I think we have some time for a couple questions. I'll just read them off in the chat. So Lee Stevens, sort of a two-parter, asked, do you have any thoughts on transcripts with added visual descriptions? And have any of the groups you've worked with said that these were useful at all?
Oh, that's a good question. Putting the extra visual descriptions into the transcripts, I think that could be helpful actually. And I'll just make quick mention that some folks tried to get away with only a transcript and say that is accessible, and that's not the optimal method. And so it's nice to be able to have a transcript, but it's also nice to be able to have a video that's actually audio described, not just a transcript. But good idea to put in a transcript that has visual descriptions.
Awesome. So Fernanda asks, have you tested how more described videos performed if they have music or soundscape recordings in the background? I would assume that it might be too busy for people, but it could also help create an atmosphere or emotional connection to the content.
Yeah, I think you basically summarized the pros and cons of music. It's definitely more distracting. It could be harder to hear. I think that's the most common comment I get for a lot of my animations is the music is too loud or it's distracting. Some people don't like the music. And then in multimedia learning theory, if we want to actually teach something to somebody, we want to eliminate as many distractions as possible and really focus on the message. But that said, like you said, you can have that emotional connection and you can provide a vibe and hopefully it could be a little bit more fun. So that is the balance. I don't have anything to add to what you say. I just expanded upon it.
Great. Okay, next question. Michael Konomos says, are you aware of Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning? There's an idea that more information we convey, the more cognitive labor involved. Do you know if there's any difference in knowledge transfer and recall for people with more descriptive script versus less?
That's right. So when I'm familiar with the cognitive theory of multimedia learning, and basically since video is a linear way of learning, a linear storytelling process, we don't want to burden the learner with too many things all at once, right? So for example, if we showed a screen with 10 labels, then I'm going to be reading the labels while someone is speaking. It's better to have one label pop up on a time so that my attention is not diverted. And similarly, we want the labels to pop on as I'm saying the words. So they are synced, and that is lower cognitive load. I would say that a more descriptive video, as long as it's still going along with the linear format and you're not presenting too much information at one time, that it won't necessarily increase the cognitive load. And in some cases, it could probably help, because if I don't totally understand what an animation is happening, like let's say there's an arrow animating, but I don't know exactly why the arrow is there, I could think of it as like, oh, it could be a flow of something, or do I think this organ is going to move from one place to another? It could be a little ambiguous. So if I describe it, I might be able to clarify it. So I do think having a good description is better, but of course it also depends on how good your writer is, right? And how good the writing is. So optimally, I think a good description is good.
Great. Okay. Daniela Schiller says, how do you approach narration? What type of voice, I guess, is most effective? This is kind of a question I was going to ask as well.
Well, I will say that the 2 videos that you watched were for our study, and I voiced them, and that was not the best voice. I got a chipped tooth. I can't say S's, but anyways, yeah, I think just clear and not too fast, and providing some pauses so that people can digest what you're saying is what I try to direct my speakers to go for. But other than that, like, I don't have suggestions for like male or female voices or anything like that.
Awesome. Great. So I think we're just about out of time, right? So just as a last comment, I wanted to say that I also thought it was really interesting how you were talking about the difference between describing color and form versus spatial relationships in the video. And it's interesting that you may think describing parts of the colors or shapes, or I guess the decorative elements, as you said, maybe extraneous, but I also think your skill and talent as an animator, that's where a lot of the sort of engagement comes through. So it's interesting that some people still prefer something more the descriptive because it is so engaging. But anyway, thank you again so much. That was a pleasure to hear you talk. And